You have the call.
Thanks, President. We'll come back to the procedural elements of your ruling another time. But on this matter, the latest quarterly emissions data has just been released by the department this morning, and Australia's pollution is up 2% in this quarter. These June quarter results are proof that despite the short-term drop in emissions due to COVID that this government claimed as a great success, that was nothing but a road bump. It's a reminder that a global pandemic is not a climate policy. Today's report exposes that there is no structural change happening. We're driving off the climate cliff, with Liberals, Nationals and Labor pushing their feet on the accelerator heading into this election. There are 116 new coal and gas projects in the approval pipeline that both parties want to see opened up. Yesterday, Labor voted with the government to give $50 million to gas companies to start fracking the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory against the wishes of First Nations owners. Last week, they voted together again to give millions more to coal and gas companies for carbon capture and storage. Meanwhile, there's no plan for transport pollution. There's no plan to help farmers reduce emissions. There's no plan for rolling out new renewables and to stop the gridlock. There's expansion of methane leaking coal and gas fields. This is urgent, and we have until the end of the decade to slash global pollution, or we risk setting off an irreversible chain that we cannot stop the collapse of our climate system. Once that extreme weather genie is out of the bottle, humans won't be able to put it back in. The science says that we need 74% reductions in emissions by the end of the decade, 3 times more than what the coalition has sentenced us to. Now, last month, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Albanese, said that he would respect the science when it comes to climate change. The Australian Greens will hold the Opposition Leader to those words when they soon announce their climate targets. If you want to limit Australia to 1.5 degrees of warming, which is what was just inserted into the Glasgow text, the science says that Australia's 2030 targets need to be 75%. Any target that's a 2030 target that's less than 75% is not science-based. In the 2 years since the 2019 election, the climate crisis has gotten worse, not better, so the opposition's targets need to be stronger and not weaker than they were at the last election. A 45% reduction was once the barest minimum for 2 degrees of warming. Since the Climate Change Authority report in 2014, that's been revised up by the Climate Targets Panel to 50%, but even a 50% target would only give us a 2/3 chance of staying below 2 degrees. But 2 degrees is too high. At Glasgow, the world recognised that, after they listened to the voices of Pacific Islanders, that their nations will not survive if warming reaches 2 degrees. So the text of the Paris Agreement shifted in Glasgow. 1.5 degrees is now the goal, and 2 degrees is not acceptable to the global community anymore. We listen to medical scientists for our health advice. We listen to engineering science to build bridges and towers. We listen to aeronautical science to deliver us safely around the world. We now have to listen to atmospheric science. If we don't let the science guide us through this critical decade, our generation will forever be known as the generation that handed down worse living conditions to those that followed us. That is not something that the Australian Greens will sit back and allow to happen. Transforming our economy to create the jobs and the public infrastructure that we need to avert climate catastrophe is all upside. There's no downside, except, of course, for the coal and gas corporations that are plundering our planet and donating generously to both sides of parliament. Putting the Greens in the balance of power to kick out the Liberals and push the next government to go further and faster on the climate emergency means that our next parliament will have to listen to voters and climate science and not fossil fuel donors. It is long past time that the coal and gas companies stopped writing this nation's climate policies. That is a dodgy payoff for the donations that they make to both sides of politics. And if, as the opposition leader said last week, they want climate targets to be based on science, let's see some targets that are based on science. To stick with 1.5 degrees, Australia's got to commit to a 75% reduction by 2030. Otherwise, we are cooking the planet. We can create a ton of jobs with renewable energy. We need science-based targets, not coal donors running the show.
Time has expired.